Rick, I'll start with you. Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, had an event down in Florida not far from Mar-a-Lago, and he's got a book coming out this week. How's he doing?
Yeah, no, we're getting into high season, as you say, David. You had a big event in just a few miles away from Mar-a-Lago. I think Ron DeSantis taunting Donald Trump a little bit with a bunch of major donors from all over the country, many of whom used to be Trump donors. And they met to talk about this woke agenda. And, of course, the book he's got coming out is going to be his sort of intellectual underpinning of that campaign. So he is following the one ABCs of presidential politics. First you get your name out there, you have a big re-election, you put a lot of money away in the bank, then you get a book out and you do a book tour, you hold policy conferences like this to attract donors. And then sometime after your legislative session's over, you announce for president. So he's got it working. And, of course, this isn't the only conference. Karl Rove held one with a bunch of Republican wannabes in Texas this week. And then, of course, in Washington, CPAC will start this next week. So it's going to be a lot of activity in the Republican side of the presidential primary process.
Yeah. And as Rick mentioned, this is our favorite time of the year, David Weston. It is the start of all things 2024. They announced that in August in Milwaukee, Republicans will hold their primary debate. And so all the candidates, as Rick talked about, are gearing up to raise the funds, get their staffs in place, and, of course, release their book. And, of course, Ron DeSantis's book comes out tomorrow, and he's in sort of this shadow campaign, invisible campaign mode. He was in Chicago. He was in New York. He was in Philly. And now he is making this book launch, and we understand he will probably announce his candidacy after the legislative session in Florida has finished. So that'll probably be June. And in the meantime, you've got all these other Republicans vying for the Republican nomination as well, and all of them sort of trying to knock Donald Trump off his perch, because the reality is, if you look at the polls, Donald Trump remains very much in the lead. And depending on which poll you think about or you look at, Ron DeSantis either edging him out or very close second, and everyone else from, Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, former Vice President Mike Pence, all sort of far, far distant. So they're going to be trying to make up some ground there in the next few months as this thing tightens up.
So, Rick, if Ron DeSantis is running a stealth campaign, I'm not sure what Mike Pompeo is running, or for that matter, Mike Pence or others, such as Senator Scott. When do they need to get in this race? And by the way, is there anybody who can prevail if, in fact, it's 7 or 8 candidates as opposed to 3 or 4?
Yeah, first of all, 7 or 8 candidates is going to be hard to beat Donald Trump, who comes with 35% of the Republican primary vote in his pocket. So he can win a lot of primaries with 7 opponents. So that's one issue that's going to really exacerbate itself as we get closer to actually having primaries. Everyone's got a different start time. Ron DeSantis has got a lot of options. He's got $100 million in the bank. He's very popular. He's kind of like the lead dog outside of Trump. And he can take his time. Mike Pence, he's still trying to figure out what his narrative is. He wants to take credit for the administration's efforts over the 4 years that he was vice president, but he wants to distance himself from January 6th. That's an awful tough act. So he's out there right now flogging that around, trying to figure out, will it sell? And then, of course, there are many other candidates, as Jeanne mentioned, who they're out there trying to figure out, is there enough donor interest? I mean, can I actually raise enough money to make myself credible? And that's a pretty long list right now. And, of course, then you have Nikki Haley, who's already jumped in and trying to figure it all out in real time. So we're seeing this process begin. It is high time. This quarter, we'll see more candidates getting into the race. And we won't see this pot finished till probably mid-year, Q2. But the reality is we're deeply into the primary schedule now.
Jeanne, I wonder whether the target these Republican hopefuls are aiming for is moving on them. There was a time when CPAC was like the required thing to do. You had to go to CPAC. Now we have several people who aren't even going to show up at CPAC.
Yeah, that's right. It's really stunning. So CPAC is back in Washington, D.C., I think for the first time since 2020. So they sort of moved around a bit during the pandemic, but they are back and ready to take on Joe Biden and everything Democratic. But they're going to be missing some of the, major candidates potentially on the Republican side. Ron DeSantis is not attending CPAC, we understand, and neither is Mike Pence. So I think what we're expecting there is really an all-out brawl, maybe without not attacking each other, between Nikki Haley and Donald Trump. And I think Nikki Haley is going to be trying to introduce herself to the donors Rick was just talking about, or reintroduce herself as a candidate versus a governor or versus a UN ambassador. And she is probably going to take on Trump without taking him on directly. And I think we're going to see her make the generational argument she's been trying to make. And I can't even predict, nor would I try to see how Donald Trump reacts to any of this, but it's going to be a very interesting 4 days of CPAC.
Rick, presumably there will be a Democratic nominee as well. And listening to President Biden speaking actually to David Muir at ABC News, I guess it's up to Jill Biden, the First Lady, to decide, because she said he's running, and he said, boy, I heard that. I'll have to go check it out.
Well, first of all, it wouldn't be the first time that the First Lady or the spouse doesn't make this decision. So he is actually, I think, in the majority of politicians who have the ambition to be president of the United States, or in his case, take another turn at it. So, yeah, these are family events. You cannot run if you don't have uniformity in your family around the idea of doing this, because it affects them just as much as it affects the candidate himself. So I think that's actually telling, right? I mean, how many people feel secure enough to say, I've got to be, my wife is really going to be the one who is out there telling people what I'm going to do. Now, she's got a little bit of message discipline issues, because she's out on the road telling reporters one thing while he's trying to message a different thing to the political elites in Washington. So luckily, they'll all get together and figure it out soon. But I don't think it's guaranteed that he's running, but if he doesn't, he's got to figure this out pretty quick, because he can't leave the Democratic Party in a last-minute scramble to figure out who's going to be their nominee.
Even though the other thing I noted was he said, yes, it is a legitimate question about my age. He said, take a look at me. I'm vigorous enough. But he said, yeah, that's fair game. I'm not going to resist that.